So in the last video, we added the code to actually read in the directions, the exits in other words, but there's a fair amount of code here still, and I asked the question, what's the advantage? What have we actually done here? And with the small number of locations that we have at the moment, the advantage of this code compared to just sort of hard coding the locations is not really obvious. But there's actually a downloaded file called gamedata.zip that's in the resources section of this video. So download that, and we're going to use those files instead, and you'll see that it gets a little bit easier when we've got lots of locations. So let's actually have a look at that. So I'm going to swing over to a folder where I've already got this downloaded. So again, you can get this from the resources section of this video. Unzip it. And you can see in the folder now there's going to be two files, directions_big and locations_big. So what I'm going to do is go back to my project, and I'm going to just right click it, reveal in Finder. And I'm going to go into my input to output folder, which is the project name that I've assigned for this one. And I'm going to actually just copy these files. These are the ones that basically are from the unzipped game data file, and I'm going to paste them into there. And I'm going to go back to my project, and they should appear as they have in the left-hand side. Now what we're going to do, instead of renaming the existing files, I'm going to actually change the references on lines 43 and 64 to use the new names. So it's going to be obviously directions_big and locations_big. So I'm going to change those names and use these files. Big, directions_big. And now I've done that, and let's just have a look at some of them. So let's look at locations_big. You can see we've actually got a lot of locations now, and this is basically the entire locations for the entire game. So it's actually obviously quite a few there. And likewise for directions_big, there's now going to be a lot more entries. A significant amount of entries there. So let's just close some of these files down. And then we'll give this a run again to make sure it's still working. So let's run it. And you can see our input seems to have worked because we've got a lot of location data on the screen there and a lot of imported locations. Significant amount there. So let's go down to the bottom and we'll just try running a few locations. So these are getting hard to read now because of these locations. So let's actually just change the run window. I'm going to change it so it's down the bottom. So I'm going to move that to bottom. We'll be able to see that a little bit better now. There we go. And just to check, let's go south. And let's go north. That seems to be working okay. Okay, so quit out of that. Now, this is again the locations from the original Colossal Cave adventure game. And that actually had a random element so that you don't end up stuck in a forest, which is actually quite easy to do with this version. And we also haven't got any items, such as the key, so you can't actually get into the caves at the moment. We can cheat a bit though. By setting the starting location to, say, location 64, for example, we can actually sort of move to a different area. So let's just look at doing that. We're going to go back to main. Close the run window down for now. So what we can do here is on line 29, instead of the location being 1, let's actually comment that out and temporarily put it to location equals 64, which is an entirely different location. And that should start us off in a more complex junction. So let's just do that to see that it's actually working. At a complex junction, a low hands and knees passage from the north joins a higher crawl from the east, etc. So we should now be able to just do a bit of wandering. So let's just go east. Might help if I type in the right window. So east. We go east again. Here at wit's end. Go east again. And basically that's a good way to get lost. But anyway, you can see it seems to be working, and that's good. So if we open up the big locations and directions files again, so directions big, locations big, I'll just close this run window down. Can you imagine actually, typing all that code in to initialize this manually into your class instead of actually reading it into a file? So you can see that this is obviously going to be far more efficient when you've got lots of data to read that data in using some code rather than trying to type it directly into our Java files that we did initially before we actually got into this input-output section. And these files, by the way, were actually extracted from the Fortran source from the original Colossal Cave game. You might be wondering, why are these descriptions all in uppercase? Well, that's because most of the terminals at the time, and this we're talking the early 1970s then, they couldn't actually display lowercase characters, believe it or not. But as I mentioned earlier, there's actually a random element to the game, and we haven't implemented that yet. And if you get to a secret canyon, the description does not necessarily mean that you're in the same bit of it each time. So in other words, the available exits can change. But getting back to our code, we've now seen a simple way to write data to a file and to read it back again. And in the process, we looked at the finally block to ensure that the cleanup code is executed, even if an exception is thrown. And we also chained objects together. I'll just go back and have a look at some of this code when I'm talking about it. We can see a reference of chaining there on line 64. So we also chained these objects together, as I mentioned, to allow a scanner to read from a buffered reader that uses a stream to get its data. And I also covered the try with resources method that became available with Java 7 and that resulted in much cleaner code, and we saw an example of that. Now, I haven't used that in the example that reads the data back in, mainly because it's important to understand how to perform I/O with older Java versions when you have to maintain legacy code, and that will happen quite a bit. But also, the second reason for doing that secret evil plan was it makes for a good challenge for you to do it. So the code to read the data back is a bit cluttered, catching exceptions, and we don't actually do anything with those exceptions, but unfortunately our options are a little bit limited here. Now, when we had code in our main method, we could just specify that the method throws the exceptions and remove the catch block. Now, that approach can't be taken with a static initialization block. And the reason is that the static initialization block, they're actually executed when the class is loaded. So in other words, there's no way for any of our code anywhere to catch any exceptions that are thrown. Now, you can throw unchecked exceptions in an initialization block, but not checked ones. Unchecked exceptions, if you remember, don't have to be caught, but checked exceptions must be. But with that said, we can rewrite the code to use the Java 7 try with resources to make it a bit tidier. And in the next video, I'm going to set you a bit of a challenge on to get you to do just that. So stick around and I'll see you in the next video, and we'll have a challenge for you to undertake for this code. See you there.